addiction is a very human condition.
Right.
You know, it's this natural instinct to soothe and to connect that just has gone awry. It's heavily linked to trauma. There's all these very real and very compassionate reasons why people get addicted. But that's not what we internalize at all. And it's not what we're told. So I want to continue to just beat that message. And the way that I did it and have done it is just by telling my own experience.
What does it take to put your life's work out there in a really big way? How much can I do with this one precious life? Welcome to The Selfish Gift. If you're thinking of writing a deeply personal memoir about some tough stuff, but you're not sure how much to share, and you're worried about how going public with your story might affect the people closest to you, this episode is for you. My guest today has written 2 books focusing on her journey with alcohol dependence and detailing how she got sober, and her stories very much deal with how her drinking affected her family. Laura McKowen, aside from being one of my heroes, is the author of the bestselling memoir, Are the Luckiest, The Surprising Magic of a Sober Life. And her new book, Push Off From Here, 9 Essential Truths to Get You Through Sobriety and Everything Else, is out in March 2023, which as we record this is just a couple weeks away. Laura has written for the New York Times, and she's been featured in all kinds of national outlets and the Today Show and more. In 2020, Laura founded the Luckiest Club, which is a global sobriety support group. And she writes a Substack newsletter called Love Story. If you've been following Laura for a while, you might also remember her as the co-host of the now defunct Home podcast, which she co-hosted with Holly Whitaker. Laura, it is such a thrill to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you have become really one of the leading voices in the new sobriety movement. When did you decide that was what you wanted for your life?
I definitely didn't decide that. It sort of happened to me and I said yes to it. I wanted to be a writer. I had always wanted to be a writer, but one of the challenging things about being a personal essay writer or writing nonfiction memoir is you're writing about your life. And I had no capacity to tell the truth about my life at that, up until the time that I did when I was getting sober. I had a lot of secrets and thought that I would die with those secrets. And so I heard Jason Isbell once say, he's also sober, and say sobriety gave him a story to tell. And that's how I feel about getting sober as well, is it gave me a story to tell. And I was finally ready to tell the truth. And it just so happened to be that the topic was this topic. I never decided that this, it's a shock to me all the time, even still, that this is the thing I'm talking about.
This is the thing. And it's like you say in your 9 things, like this is your thing is one of the 9 things. Right. And, and this is like super your thing to the point where it's your brand.
Yeah,
it's not just like your personal thing, it's become your brand. But, but you're such a, so that's super interesting. And I want to talk more about your journey as a writer and your initial impulses and all the stories that you weren't ready to tell. But let's stay focused for a moment on your role in the sobriety movement. So I am a member of the Luckiest Club, not necessarily. I haven't officially signed up to your Luckiest Club, but I am a member on, a fellow traveler on the path of sobriety.
Yes.
And your first book was definitely one of the most helpful books that I read when I was learning to find some distance between myself and alcohol. And what I love about what's happening in this sobriety movement right now is this kind of new understanding of why we drink and how we can get sober. So clearly now, you have your own sobriety support group. This is something that you care deeply about. Why is it important to you to help people find freedom from alcohol?
Yeah, great question. There are many reasons. I'll try to highlight the ones that feel most important. First, I felt very distinctly when I hit the wall with my drinking, and really it felt like I was being forced into sobriety, that alcohol was this thing that helped me belong, like all my life, belong in my own skin, feel comfortable, connect with other people, be part of work culture and dating and love and friendship and all of that. And when I hit the wall and became, the one with a problem, I felt like I essentially had to go somewhere in a room, a dark room, and go figure it out. And I was kind of felt like I was exiled from polite
like
society.
Your time of confinement.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought, this is really messed up that we love and encourage and promote this, drinking, until you cross this imaginary line where you are problematic, and then you need to go away. It made me very angry. It seemed very unfair. It seemed hypocritical. And it seemed like we lost the plot on here. It was just there's something deeply wrong about how we view alcohol versus how we view people who get addicted to alcohol. And I didn't have all the words for it then, but I had this anger and this sort of sense of injustice, even rage, and started talking about that. And that is part of the reason I still talk about it, because it's a very hypocritical, almost gaslighting effect that we have on people who end up getting addicted to alcohol.
It's also super counterproductive. Sorry to jump in. It's super counterproductive, right? Because by saying to someone, okay, now that you have admitted that you are struggling with this, you're going to be shamed and excluded. And so, of course, that stands between human beings and their ability to access support.
That's right.
Crazy.
Right. It keeps people drinking. It keeps people stuck. It keeps people in shame, which is the sort of second point. Is there's just so much shame that I felt as a person who fell into this and got addicted, especially as a mother. And I wanted to and want to let people know that the addiction is a very human condition.
Right.
It's this natural instinct to soothe and to connect that just has gone awry. It's heavily linked to trauma. There's all these very real and very compassionate reasons why people get addicted. But that's not what we internalize at all. And it's not what we're told. So I want to continue to just beat that message. And the way that I did it and have done it is just by telling my own experience, right? And also pulling apart these ideas that we have about alcohol being this beautiful, benign, sort of illustrious substance, and not a drug. And other culture, the mommy culture, I don't even know what you call that, behemoth that it is, mommy wine culture. I don't know if I said mommy culture or mommy wine culture, but targeting women and mothers as, for the alcohol industry is huge.
Right.
And just overall, bigger than addiction, I want people to have a different relationship to their pain and to not see it as such a problem. Because in my experience, Rumi did have it right. The cure for the pain is in the pain, that we have to go into it and through it. And the first step and the last step and every step in between has to do with being honest and starting to cultivate the ability to be honest about what's going on with us. And so that's sort of the the overarching reason. I mean, I don't think addiction is even that interesting. I don't think it's that unique.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one thing of many things that can happen to people and throw them up against that wall of pain that is so great that they have to kind of surrender and enter into what Jung called the second half of life, what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. It's one portal that we walk through, but there are many portals. There are many things.
Right. Well, I find it really interesting and noteworthy that the reason why you felt unable to kind of like settle into your chosen identity as a writer earlier was because of shame that kept you from knowing yourself and what you wanted to share and write about. And yet the thing that broke you open and brought you into the public sphere is alcohol addiction, which itself is so kind of heavily shrouded in that shame. So that it sounds almost like this, in retrospect, would you consider it a gift?
Yeah, 100%. And I kind of knew that at the beginning. Even as desperately as I did not want to get sober and did not want to leave behind all that I thought drinking was giving me, I did have this sense that this was the invitation, that this was the portal that I could walk through and the story that I could tell.
Yeah. Now, your support group, the Luckiest Club, is not an AA offshoot, right? Although you yourself went to AA, I don't know if you still do. Talk to me about the relationship that you have with AA, and also what you now see as its limitations, and how your support group approaches community differently.
Sure. I write about this pretty extensively in both books. It's a very complex and nuanced thing, but I will do my best to. I'm always very reticent to criticize AA because it did give me so much. It saved my life. I think that was my first community, and I don't know that if I would be here without it. And I will forever and always revere it because of that. And I think the 12 steps are beautiful. And the fellowship is, while flawed because people are flawed, it is also beautiful. Yes, that was my first community. It was really all I knew of being sober. Like, people who needed to get sober went to AA. That's what I thought, right? That's what a lot of people think. And they have for more or less the past 80 years established the language of recovery of any kind, right? It's depicted in movies and books, and people generally know what a meeting means, go to a meeting, and what the 12 steps mean and what amends mean. And that's all because of AA. And that's incredible. It's also got its limitations, because if you think about any other medical condition, there is no other, there's nothing even to compare it to in terms of the idea that there's this one path and there's this one way to go, and that it largely has to do with God, sort of, and like meetings, like it's not
and
clinical.
Powerlessness. That was the part that turned me off of it. It was like, I'm already feeling powerless enough. I'm not going to get through this or find my feet under me by telling myself more that I'm powerless. I needed to feel more empowered to notice what was true for me and make a different choice.
Yes. And that, that AA was started by Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson in the late 1930s. Two men who were, it had heavy, I don't want to say evangelical roots, but Christian roots. It had, it followed a certain profile of person, and it was for men. I mean, the original title was like how more than 100 men recovered from alcohol alcoholism.
And there's a chapter like for wives, right?
There's a chapter called For the Wives that they still haven't taken out. I can't figure out why. So it's got some old timey vibes and some patriarchal vibes, and that still translates through the language and in some of the fellowships. That said, what they asserted at the time was revolutionary. And they said that alcoholism is what they, we've since let go of that term, but it's still used. And so we'll just say it we'll just keep saying it here to make it easy. But that alcoholism was a result of a medical condition, an allergy to alcohol versus this moral failing, which was absolutely revolutionary at the time.
Right. Right.
So, and what has been built because of the conversations between those two men is it's astounding. Millions and millions of people it has helped, and it hasn't changed a lot. It hasn't grown a lot. It hasn't evolved a lot. And because of when it was founded, they didn't know about things like trauma. They didn't have, the body was not included in the modality for healing. Right. And we know a lot more about those things now. Those are just two examples. The other thing is, if you're an atheist, if you have a troubled relationship, if you got some spiritual trauma, or you've got a troubled relationship with the concept of God, it's really
or the church
as
an institution.
Yeah.
Right?
It's really hard to swallow. And it also, it depends on where you live and what meetings are accessible to you. It is a very different experience if you're in Boston, like I was, versus if you are in Podunk, Kansas or something, and you've got, the same 8 men showing up to a meeting, and that's all you got. You're going to have a very different experience. So,
and maybe someone in that room might have been an agent of one of your traumatic experiences in the past.
Sure. Yes. Yes. And so it's not, I think, again, the 12 steps themselves are ancient spiritual wisdom. They're beautiful. I do believe that. And the longer I go in recovery, the more I start to fall back on the axioms and the sort of sayings that I thought were so annoying early on that I learned in AA.
Yeah.
But I don't go to meetings anymore. I find them to sometimes be depressing, frankly, and sort of stuck in this fear-based mindset. That's not always true, but it felt like that for me.
And there's a very, very strong identification with the condition, right? Rather than saying, I'm having this experience and this experience may come to an end. I have ended that experience, and I have what now? What next?
That is a huge piece of it. That's worth stating. The over-identification with alcoholism or being an alcoholic just didn't make sense to me. Like these very normal human sort of personality traits or affects or behaviors that would be then attributed to alcoholism. It's like, no, you're just doing that because you're a human being.
Right.
And this very binary view of drinkers, or rather normies versus alcoholics.
Right.
You're either in one of the two camps, right? You're either an alcoholic or you're a normie. And the normie was said with this sort of if only vibe, oh, it's unfortunate we're not normies, and I just don't like that. It didn't feel right. And look, we know a lot more now. We know the alcohol use disorder, which it's now called, is on a spectrum. That I think a lot of people that don't like their relationship with alcohol wouldn't feel comfortable or wouldn't qualify in an AA meeting. And so I think what's the good thing that's happened now is the aperture has opened and widened on the conversation. Who's allowed to have these conversations? Who's allowed to say, I don't want to drink anymore. It's not working for me, without having to, go to a 12-step meeting and make amends and count themselves or call themselves an alcoholic till the day they die and all of those things. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with making amends or any of that process. I think the 12 steps actually is a process that anyone could benefit from. I'm just saying, even 10 years ago, labeling oneself like admitting that you had a problem with alcohol meant a whole bunch of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that really
it's
changing, and it's such a liberating trend. And so I can see why it matters to you. And I mean, now you have your second book is also focused on sobriety and on, well, it's 9 things for sobriety to get you through sobriety and everything else. So, tell me a little bit about the evolution from book 1 to book 2. Book 1 was really a memoir about your experience drinking, getting sober, moving past it. And then, and now, talk to us about,
Sure,
how that led to book 2.
Yes. So book 1, you're right. It was my story of addiction and sobriety. But if you look at the epigraph of that book, there are these 9 points, and they came from a letter that a woman had wrote me in written. Can you edit that out? That a woman wrote to me in 2016, asking what she should say to her sister who's struggling with alcohol. And she didn't want to lose her sister. She didn't want to scare her away, but she was really concerned and scared and frustrated. And she said, I don't know what to say to her. What would you have wanted to hear? And I was a couple years sober by then. And I wrote her this long letter in return. And at the end of it, I said, if all of this is too much, just give her this list. Here's my list of things you should say. And it included these 9 things. And so those 9 things stuck with me, and I started to share them on social media here and there, and they seem to like stick with other people too.
Can you just run through what the 9 things are?
Yes. I knew that I wanted them to be the epigraph to We Are the Luckiest. And they are, this is them in their original form. They got tweaked a little for push off from here. But 1, it is not your fault. 2, it is your responsibility. 3, it is unfair that this is your thing. 4, this is your thing. 5, this will never stop being your thing until you face it. 6, you can't do it alone. 7, only you can do it. 8, I love you. And 9, I will never stop reminding you of these things. So those 9 things are what appeared as the epigraph in We Are the Luckiest. And people like really latched onto them. I would have interviews about the book and they only wanted to talk about the epigraph, like this little part that wasn't even like in the book, it was like,
wow.
At the beginning. I did a whole podcast episode about those one time. And I loved that. I love that people like them. So fast forward to 2020 in the pandemic, and I started the Luckiest Club. And I knew that I wanted the 9 things to be part of it somehow. And I made them like kind of the backbone or the mission of the community. And we say them at the end of every meeting. They're very much a part of our culture. People have developed shorthand for them. So like number 8 is you are loved. But I changed the last 2 points to be everybody. So instead of saying I love you, it's you are loved. Mm-hmm. And then instead of I will never stop reminding you of these things, it's we will never stop reminding you of these things. So it became clear in the past 2.5, 3 years that people really attached to these 9 things and they made sense to them intuitively, but they weren't quite sure exactly how to apply them, like what they actually meant. Like we get what it's not your responsibility means, but like explain that. Explain what that means. And how do I actually practice responsibility? Or what do you mean when you say it's unfair that this is your thing? Like, why is that even helpful?
Right.
Or what, do we expect things to be fair? I get the most pushback about that one. So it became clear that there was this need to understand them. And even I needed to understand them. Like I knew what I meant when I said them, but I It's one thing to write a point down. It's quite another to explain it.
You were in kind of
so
like pure download mode. You were just like, these these messages are coming through me. And then only later were you like, time to unpack that. What is really behind that?
Right. What did I actually mean? Right. So that's what
did you always
is.
know that would become like, from a publishing perspective, just looking at like, gosh, this is just such a sort of an elegant, of course, you know, sort of follow-up concept, but that in push off from here, the whole entire book is structured around those 9 things. So you have each one of those 9 things gets its own chapter where you really unpack it.
Yeah.
And it's just so perfectly dovetails on from the last book. But what I remember you saying the other day is that that wasn't initially what you thought your book 2 would be about. What were you originally going to write?
I never knew that. I mean, if I did, that is some serious marketing.
Right. It's like, I should write a really, really, really sticky epigraph. And then that'll be my jumping off point for book 2. Okay.
First, I'm going to write a blog post in 2016 that is just, you know, has these zinger points. And then I'm going to put it as an app. Yeah. No, I had no idea. But
that was your future self
really elegant marketing plan.
No, honestly, Laura, that's like your future self coming and tapping you on the damn shoulder back in 2016, going, pss, 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 really important messages coming through. This is going to become like a very foundational thing in the next chapter of your life.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But what were you originally going to write about? It was something else.
Yes. So love addiction, another memoir, because what I learned as I was getting sober, and what I have learned, is that underneath the drinking, of course, there's the original wound. And for me, it was all relational, and it was all about how I related to men and sort of my dysfunction. And I say that in a nice way. I'm not beating up on myself, but like I had a lot of pain and problems in romantic relationships, not unlike a lot of people, but mine manifested in some pretty acute ways that felt very similar to alcohol addiction. The obsession, the withdrawal, and I, you know, came to learn that's actually a thing. I still hate the term love addiction. I think it's silly, but it checks out. And so I wanted to write another memoir. I thought that would absolutely be the next book about that. And that's actually the third book. I got a 2-book deal for this. So push off from here. And then that will be the next book. But no, I didn't expect to write. I didn't think I would ever write a kind of prescriptive book. I had no intention to.
So interesting. So in this deeply, now you're kind of like, you must be pretty comfortably ensconced in the personal writing sort of category or zone. Now you must have developed some level of comfort with your own vulnerability and ability to disclose personal stuff and make art out of your personal life. But was it always easy for you? How talk to me about like the navigating the feelings of, did you get a vulnerability hangover after writing a really personal blog post? Did you ever have feedback that made you regret a level of openness or disclosure? How do you decide where to set the boundaries?
Yes. So no, this didn't always come easy for me at all. Like I said, I had a lot of lies. I mean, I think anyone who goes through addiction lives a very dual existence, at least towards the end of their drinking. But I feel like I lived that way more or less my whole life, because there was the performing Laura, and then there was how I actually felt inside. And I didn't know how to express how I felt. I didn't think I could safely, all these things that prevented me from really expressing how I felt. So much so that you get distance from how you actually feel, right? I aspired to be this very people-pleasing, happy, always joyous, never needing anything type of person. And, no one is exactly that. Alcohol held that up. And then eventually it all comes crumbling down, and you're left with, okay, what's really in there? And that's what I started to write about when I was starting to get sober. So it didn't come easy before that. But again, like when I hit the wall with drinking and I was faced with sobriety, it was very much an instinct to like save myself by writing and telling the truth more than it was some conscious thought process about weighing risk versus reward of telling the truth. You know what I mean? It's like, I spent my entire life caring what people thought so much that I knew that I couldn't, the drive to just express what was going on with me and figure out what was going on with me and write was so much stronger for the first time in my life than like protecting this image. And also I joke about this, but it's kind of true. When your reputation is destroyed or you destroy your reputation, you're kind of free. By the end of my drinking, I was not looking good in a lot of people's eyes, like people that were very close to me. I had done so much damage and I had betrayed my husband, and there was a lot of real sort of, I had destroyed my reputation in a lot of ways. And it's like, at that point, it's like, fuck it. I'm free. What am I going to do? You know, what's the worst that can happen? It's kind of already happened. So I'm just going to tell the truth now.
And has that become easier, more comfortable? Has it felt, more and more liberating over time? Or do you still struggle to know, like, oh, is this too much of a dark or dirty little secret to share?
Yeah, I want to be clear. Like, I didn't just say everything ever. There's still, I think people have this idea that if you write a memoir, you write about everything. And the reality is you write about very little. You just pick the stories that are going to illustrate the most honest things that you want to convey. Right. So there's all kinds of stuff that I didn't say or don't write about, topics that I don't go into, people that I don't discuss. So it was never that. Everything I've ever put out was very intentional, especially when it concerned other people.
And I think that's so, sorry, that's so important when we are contemplating writing a memoir. I know that a lot of people are struggling with that exact point, the idea about what privacy means, and the fact that you can disclose openly and intentionally while still intentionally retaining some things as private, and that those two things don't work against each other. They're absolutely part of the memoirist journey.
Well, privacy and secrecy are very different.
Right.
Privacy, we're all allowed to have privacy. Privacy is important. Boundaries are important. Secrets are what I could not have. And that didn't mean that everyone needs to know everything about me. It meant that among my closest circle and the people that I entrust with my health and my therapists and people in sobriety, other women, amongst the most tight private circle, there are no secrets. There's nothing that's secret anymore. And that was a process, but that's very different than having privacy. Because a lot of, we have this sort of obsession with truth-telling. Right. And what I often see people do is what I've heard called trauma porn, where you're just saying things that actually shouldn't be said. And there's this like weird corruption of the soul that you kind of feel when you hear it or you look at it. Like you're like, no, I don't, that's not what we mean by telling the truth. Just because you can tell the truth doesn't mean you should. And sometimes it's very unkind. And sometimes it's inappropriate, right? So there's this intuition that I think every writer has to develop about where that line is. And it's different for different people. I was always okay for whatever reason. I crossed this point where I was like, I'm okay talking about the drinkings, everything involved in drinking. because that's part of the story that I can own. When it got to other people that were involved, that's, where I took it I took a lot of care and still take a lot of care to not tell other people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
So for
Mm-hmm.
example, in talking about my ex-husband, he witnessed the worst of my drinking. He was a victim of the worst of my drinking in many ways. And I was very careful with how I talked about him or what he might have experienced because of me. I never want to put feelings into someone's body or words into their mouth. But you can't write about those things without talking, because so much of the events that occurred were relational.
Right.
So much of the trauma that occurs is relational. So same with my daughter, right?
Did you seek the permission or pre-approval of people in your life before publishing? I'm always fascinated by authors' answer to this question. Like
I am too. Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of, the advice that I have heard is that don't ask for their permission before you write it, and certainly don't involve them in reading drafts while you're trying to put your story down on paper, but maybe give them a heads up, and depending on who they are, consider like letting them have the power of veto over certain scenes or events. But
Yeah.
I think that everybody navigates that differently. So how have you managed, the inclusion of even the mention of other people in telling your own story?
Yes. I don't know if it's the advice I got. I do know that I got advice because I found myself very stuck initially when writing even though I said a lot on blogs and in essays online, writing a book feels different. Like, it's going to be out there as an artifact forever.
Right.
So when I was writing it, I definitely felt blocked in writing scenes about my marriage, for example, or my mother or my dad. And someone said, just write it as if no one will ever read it. You're going to get like 65,000 opportunities to edit. And I'm glad they said that, because it's true. And so I did that. And then I did not share anything with anyone while I was writing it. And then when it got time to, in edits, and pre-publication, I did get the permission. I wouldn't say it was permission. It was a heads up, but I would have listened if they objected strongly. From my ex-husband, the John character who was in my book, who got a lot of airtime. He was someone I dated. And my mom. There was no one else in there that was where I used their real name or they were like identifiable because of the context that I gave. So I didn't ask permission or give a heads up to anyone else. And I did it a little differently with each. So with my ex-husband, I said, he is now remarried. He was dating this woman at the time. And I think he was very scared about what I might possibly say in the book. And I said, these are the basic things that I covered. And he said, yeah, that's fine. But he did say, you're not saying anything that's like going to threaten this, like my relationship, is it? Are you? And it's like, no, like, what do you mean? Like, confess my love for you or something, that was a funny conversation, but he's like, yeah, I mean, he had known that I was writing a book for like 2 years. So this is someone that we have a pretty good relationship. So he was not in the dark about that. And he'd never asked to read it. I offered. He will never read the book. So
Wow.
That's that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know. People find that fascinating, but it's not knowing him. Like, I think he doesn't necessarily want to relive that time of his life. I don't think it was his favorite. And my mom, I gave her a heads up on what the parts where I included her. I was very, very careful with how I talked about my mom. She does play quite a big part in the book. She said, yes, honey, of course, it's fine. I get it. I'm sure it's all wonderful. And she was absolutely devastated when the book came out. So that was tricky, and we can talk about more if you want. And then
wait, so she had not read it before it came out.
She didn't want to read it.
She didn't want to read it. And then it came out. And then I was like, you said, what about me? I hurt you in which ways? And oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Ouchies. Oh.
Yeah. I think, I understand that as a parent, that it would be hard to learn how much pain your child was in. Like she knew, but she didn't know.
Yeah.
And to feel complicit in that in any way. So it has led to us being closer, but it took a while and it was hard and hard. It was hard.
I think that one of the things that people really struggle with when it comes to how memoir writing affects your relationships is that the unavoidable truth is that every single human being experiences life differently. And we walk, every shared, even a shared experience has at least two different perspectives in it. And those perspectives are often wildly different from one another. And so the memoirist's privilege of kind of forming an official record of events is can be really upsetting to those who have a very different experience inside of those events. But ultimately it is
and don't
not
have
your
a
job
platform or a voice to say it. Like
but it's not your job as a memoir writer to give some sort of omniscient view, which is like, this is tying in everybody's version of events perfectly. And you can't, you absolutely can't. And nor would that be an interesting piece of writing. We want to go inside your perspective and your lived experience. So, but yeah, I find it just so fascinating, like how we navigate these things, and there's, and how we clean up the mess when there has been, a rupture in connection after writing something that someone gets triggered by or disagrees with. Laura, I want to make sure
it's not even,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. It's not that she even disagreed with anything that I wrote. She was just more like, I didn't know.
Right.
How did I not know? And what does that mean about me? And this and that, she was very upset.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm sure that I would be too as a mom.
Yeah.
I really want to drill into, your experience as a writer. So you started writing long before there was a book deal. And as you mentioned, becoming a writer was a long held vision that you held for your own life. When you started experimenting with attempts to get sober, you were blogging about it. At what point did how did you get a book deal? At what point did this become a book and a real thing?
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to write a book like before I even got finally sober. Like I knew, because that had been such a dream of mine for so long, and it'd been like this way far off fantasy that I thought I would probably just talk about till I died and never really do. But once I got sober, I was like reaching for that hard. I got sober in 2014. I got the book deal in late 2018. So, and I was writing through that whole time, not writing a manuscript per se, but I was writing a lot. I was writing a lot of blog posts and essays and submitting pieces online, some that got published, many that didn't, and sort of went into the book. So I was working on content. I think I started to I got an agent in 2017.
So how did you get your agent? Don't skip over the steps. Did you have a book proposal in order to get the agent, or did the agent find you? Like, how did you make that happen?
Yes. So I'll try to make this brief because I've had 3 agents. The first agent came on introduction from another author who knew I was interested in writing a book. I did not have a book proposal ready when I got that introduction. So I panicked, spent the entire 4th of July week, which was like mostly, people weren't working, spent that entire week drafting a proposal. Still don't know how I did that because it was pretty damn good. And I had enough material, like sample material to use, and sent that off to her. And we went back and forth on that and that concept for about a year. And I realized this agent is too big for me. I am a teeny tiny fish in her pond. And to her credit, I was not ready. My material was not ready. I didn't have a clear vision for it. I needed someone to really like sit with me and work with me. And she just wasn't in a place to do that.
Right.
So I was actually on the Today Show, and the agent number 2, after he saw me on the Today Show, he had been following me on Instagram. He was starting his own literary agency, and he sent me an email after the Today Show appearance and said, I heard you're working on a book. Do you have representation? And I said, I do, but I'm looking, I would love to talk, because I knew this other agent wasn't going to work out. And so I signed with him like that week. And he got it. He was what I needed at the time. He is amazing. He is amazing. And so he sold We Are the Luckiest. We shopped it around for 9+ months.
Seems like such a long time, especially in the world of self-publishing, when people are like, how could you wait for like a year with the first agent, then 9 months? So like, at what point did you consider just going, fuck it, I'm going to just put this on Kindle Unlimited and make this a thing in the world?
I did. I actually went on this retreat in the winter of, in November of 2000. Is that true? 18. Yeah. I went on this retreat early November 2018, and I was like, fuck it. I'm going to self-publish because I can't take this. And I didn't grow up in the publishing world. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know how slow it moves. I didn't know any of this. And I was, my peers were getting book deals, and I just was like, I was melting. And I called Alex when I got home from that retreat and said, I'm just going to self-publish. Like, this has been great. Thank you. But I think I'll have good success this way. And he's like, just let me go out one more time. So we did a little bit of work to the proposal and the sample material, and we ended up selling it like 6 weeks later.
Wow. Amazing. So the old fire got lit under somebody's butt there. Can I ask you? I know I can ask you because you've written about this on your Substack. What did you get as an advance? And tell me about the money side, the business side of the book deal.
Yes. I've written all about this on my Substack. So I love sharing this information because it's such a weird, secretive, private thing. And I wish it wasn't. I got $20,000 advance for We Are the Luckiest. It was paid in 3 installments. I sold it to New World Library, which is a small independent publisher. They've been around for a long time. They were amazing. And it was for world rights. So it included, there weren't going to be any other deals that came out of that. And that included the audiobook too. And I would record the audiobook. So, for no additional payment. So it was $20,000 advance, paid in 3 installments, one upon signing, one upon acceptance of the manuscript, one upon publication of the hardcover. And what else do you want to know after that?
So that's, actually the next question that's on the tip of my tongue here is, so you got a $20,000 advance, and that was on the basis of you had a platform, you had an Instagram following, did you have the podcast already? And like,
yes, the podcast,
just wondering
was
what
like,
people can expect, like is realistic based on where you're, cause you were a first time author, but you weren't an unknown person. You'd already been on the Today Show and lots of other places.
Yeah. I had I think at that point I had like 30,000 people on Instagram, maybe 20,000 on Facebook. I have since like killed that Facebook page. But I had a bit of a platform. I was not an unknown, and I had a really successful podcast, Home, that had ended in 2018, but it had a run from 2015 to 18. And because of that, I had met a lot of authors. And so I had connections to people that agreed to give endorsements for the book, or to at least read the book. Right. And these were big names that were well known, right, to publishers. I also had an introduction to this editor at New World Library through an author friend. So that helped too. He made that introduction. So I was not an unknown.
So that was you had a lot of strings to your bow at that point, and still $20,000. It's not like you're not going to retire on that.
No,
and then
it's about $5,000 once your agent gets a cut, and meaning $5,000 per payment. Once your agent gets their cut and you pay taxes, it's like not much money,
Yeah. So, and then what I know as a publisher is that most books don't earn out their advance. And for the layman out there, what that means is that, so the advance that the author receives upfront is an advance against future royalties. And as the books sell and the monies owed to the author stack up at the point when the monies owed to you exceed the amount already paid, that's when you start getting extra checks. And most books never sell sufficient quantities for the author to earn out the advance that they've already been paid. So
that's right.
Where did you, so the book comes out, you're watching it sell. At what point did you start getting extra checks? And I'm just assuming that you have.
Oh, yes. Yes, I have. I'm very fortunate that I earned out the advance within a month of that book coming out.
That's amazing.
It is. I had an amazing community. The sober and recovery community is very tight. And because I was one of the first people out there talking about it, I had a lot of, in talking about my story and sharing my story over the years, that there was an audience for the book. So I had a lot of pre-orders already when the book came out, and then I orchestrated and funded a book tour. I invested a lot in this book coming out.
Oh, okay. I'm going to ask you questions along the way.
Please.
So when you say you had a lot of pre-orders, like how many roughly? And how much did you invest?
1,500.
1,500. Okay. That's decent. Yeah. That's a good number of pre-orders. And then when you say you invested heavily in promoting it, what did the promotion of it look like?
Yes. So I invested $15,000 in a outside PR person.
So like 100% of what you got as an advance.
Yes.
You plowed into PR.
I
wow.
did.
Right.
I was a very anxious and excited and nervous first-time author. I also paid $7,500 for an editor to help me finish the book. That was every penny well spent. She helped me stay on schedule. I had a very tight, I had to finish that book in 4.5 months.
Wow.
When I signed the contract.
And why did you have to pay an outside editor rather than, didn't the publisher give you an editor? How did that conversation go?
They did. But I wanted someone like a developmental editor to help me really stay on schedule. And I was having a really hard time bridging the narrative memoir voice and the prescriptive teachy voice that I sometimes went into in We Are the Luckiest. And I really had trouble doing that.
It's hard.
And so it's really hard. And she helped me do that.
Amazing. So that was an investment well spent, and then 15,000 on PR. You're now over the amount of your advance. What else were there other investments that you had to make around the creation?
I invested in the promotion book tour. Yeah. I really wanted to go on a book tour. I mean, most people think that every author goes on a book tour when a book comes out. It's not really true anymore.
It's not the 50s anymore. No,
it's not. But I was like, I had this dream, and I also had confidence because I had been traveling around teaching retreats and workshops that I could sell in certain markets. And I just wanted to, and I could fund it. So my publisher was very kind, and they subsidized it a bit, but I paid about 80% of it. And the tour, I had like a 10-city tour or something, but it got cut in half by COVID.
Oh.
So I only went to 6 or so cities. But I paid, everything to travel, hotel, all of those things. They helped me, of course, get into bookstores. But I said, like, this is where I want to be. And I would do all of that again, the book tour part. The part that wasn't worth it for me was the publicist, because I hired her too late. I didn't know what I was asking for.
What was too late?
I hired her in like October, and the book was coming out in January, the beginning of January.
So you only started just a couple of months before the on sale date, and that wasn't enough runway.
It wasn't enough runway. she was very talented, but it just wasn't enough time. And I can see that now. She got me a couple good pieces like in Thrive Global and a couple other things. But honestly, my publicity person at my publisher was amazing and got me into all kinds of like local TV and radio, and did just an incredible job. That was one thing about working with a small publisher, is she was dedicated to me for the entire year. It wasn't just like the 4-week window around book launch, right? Or the 2-month window, whatever. But so I could have gone without that investment.
Publicity is tough. I don't really want to call it a crapshoot, but it's not far off from that, right? Because it is like that. You have to put yourself out there one way or another. And there are a lot of first time authors who just think like, oh, I don't have the energy or the wherewithal or, the appetite to build a platform and go out there. Or I feel emotionally kind of like tongue tied about promoting myself. So I'm just going to throw money at a PR campaign and expect that to work and do it for me.
Yeah.
And the truth is, I mean, it's a roulette game, because you might get a huge national media hit that can really kind of like light your book on fire, but chances are that won't happen, and it's extremely expensive. Nothing takes the place of the legwork of really putting yourself out there as an author.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I have a background in marketing. That was my career before digital marketing, before I did all this.
That helps.
Before I was switched. So I'm very comfortable with marketing. I like it. I feel like I'm a bit of an anomaly as a writer that way. Cause most of my friends are like, they don't like that part,
Yeah. And
I did a lot of hustling is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I did a lot of work.
So how has the second book launch been different from the first? Well, actually, we've been talking a good long time, and I feel like we could go for all day on this. There's so much to learn from you. I'd love to know how the writing and marketing of the second book differed from the first.
Yeah, it could not be different in every single way. I had a different agent. So after We Are the Luckiest was published, it did really well. It's sold now over 100,000 copies.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. I feel very fortunate. I wanted a New York based agent. I knew that. And I wanted someone who had the editorial connections at places where I wanted to be. The second agent that I had, amazing man, love him. I have since referred many people to him that he's taken, but he worked in publishing for like 15 years, and all his editorial connections were at like Christian/spiritual imprints. And that just wasn't where I wanted to be. And so we parted ways very amicably, and I got the agent that I have now. I work with Jamie Carr at the book group, and we started talking about Push Off From Here as a book I got to get my timing straight. So it sold in 2021, in the summer of 2021. And it sold very fast. It went to auction. I got like 7 offers. It was a wildly different experience because the first book had done really well. And I had a bigger platform too. The writing experience of writing Push Off From Here was wildly different for me. It was very, very, very hard to just do straight prescriptive writing. I had a hard time like finding that more authoritative voice. I don't like it as much. I really like storytelling and sort of the prose of memoir and essays and things like that you just can't do that much with prescriptive writing. So I didn't love that, but I did a ton of research for it too. Also not my favorite. So that part was different, but it was a gift in the sense that it really pushed me. I mean, it pushed me professionally and as a writer, and as just farther than any other professional sort of endeavor that I've ever done, writing this book. It was also coming out of the pandemic where I felt like I had lost my voice. I was very afraid to say anything, and I had to push past that. I remember feeling like I got to chapter 8. There's only with an introduction, there's only 9 chapters in the book. So by the time I got to chapter 8, I was like, oh, here's my voice. Here's my voice. And it's like the book's almost done. So,
well, what did you do? Did you go back to the beginning and like strongly revise it to kind of bring it all more
a good
aligned
amount
with that?
of revision, but also not a ton. Like it was worth, I don't think it comes across that way in the actual book. I think it was just the confidence with which I wrote it. I finally like found my groove and was feeling more confident around chapter 8. But I did do a lot of rewriting, and the publishing process has been wildly different too, because I'm at Ballantine, which is a big publisher. It's a Penguin Random House imprint. I have, much bigger team, bigger publishers. It's just a different experience.
What's better about it? What's better about it, and what's not better about it, if anything?
Yeah. So far, nothing's not better.
Okay.
I maybe I'll come up against something. I don't mean that. Wait, what do I mean? Okay. So far, I haven't had anything that is like a glaring, like, oh my God, it was so much better that first time.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a good experience is what I'm saying. I had a great first experience. And so far, this has been also a good experience. I had more one-on-one attention with my publicist and my editor for the first book, because they're just smaller. Like and you can feel that. But that's not like, I still have felt very supported at Ballantine and feel it's not that I felt left in the dark. It's just, it's different. You can tell that,
you're in a bigger machine. So even though I'm a bigger author by now and you command more, sort of attention, you're just you're in this bigger system that doesn't operate that way.
I'm a small fish in the PRH pond.
Right. Right.
It's a difference from the first book to the second, but I'm still a small fish. So,
what else can you share about the money side of it? And just tell me that it's none of my business if I'm getting too nosy, but you started to talk about you talked about your advance for the first book of 20,000, and then all that you spent was that plus more. Then the book sold 100,000 copies. So how did that leave you financially?
Yeah. So I lay it all out. Like I literally screenshot the financials because I wanted to do the exact calculation of what I have made on this book. And the reason I wanted to publish that piece in my Substack was because I often get, not often, but often enough that it sticks with you, hear things like, well, you're a best-selling author. So like, you must be a millionaire type of comments.
You're set for life. Yeah.
And it's like, I don't think you understand how authors get paid, or don't. Right. So I wanted to just level set that reality, and also level set it for other authors who feel like they're failing if they're not rolling in it or selling hundreds of thousands of copies. So I have made a total of $75,000 over 4 years with that book. That includes the advance and everything that I have invested. Net $75,000.
So 75,000 after you take out the money that you spent to.
That is a net figure. Yes. So that sounds pretty good. If someone said to you, I've made 75 grand on this book, you'd be like, that's amazing. Over 4 years, where the first year you went in the red, it's money. It's nice to make money on your work, but it's not money I could survive on.
Yeah. And how did that lead to your second? What about your second advance? And again, tell me to shut up if this is too nosy.
I won't give numbers, but it was a bigger advance. It was also a 2-book deal.
Right.
Bigger advance. 2-book deal, which means that those payments and the schedule for getting paid on the advance goes out like 5 years, right? By the time you're looking at hardcover, paperback for each. And it's there, each of those books are split into 4 payments. So I got paid for both books up front, the first quarter of both books up front. So you get kind of a bigger check up front, and then it's released in quarter increments for each book as you go along.
So do you feel like you've finally gone pro and you're like a full-time writer now? You can actually make a living at this, and it's real?
Yeah, it feels more real. I wouldn't say that I feel like I've gone pro or that, because it's still not my only job at all.
Right.
It's not my only source of income. I'm still running the Luckiest Club. I still do a lot of other things, as most writers do.
But those things are connected also to your work as a writer, but you've found other ways to generate revenue or make an income,
make a living.
Yes. Right. It's not like you're still kind of like working, doing marketing for some company or something. You're a professional author. And what I'm hearing is that being a professional author, a successful professional author who can keep a roof over her head and live a good life, must entail some things other than simply selling of the book.
Yes.
So you've got your membership, you've got, and I noticed that you moved your blog over to Substack, and Substack is a monetizable platform, right? So I'm curious about that, because I'm writing on Substack as well. Talk to me a little bit about why you decided to go to Substack and what you hope to get out of that.
Yeah, this is still very much a moving target for me. And one thing about me is I very readily and enthusiastically and easily try new things. I don't deliberate for a long time. If something feels fun and good, I will try it. And that means I've failed a lot. If you look at it that way, it also means I didn't sit there and contemplate whether I wanted to do a Substack for a year and weigh the pros and cons. I have never looked at it as a place where I could make a living. Like I thought, if I could make a little money off of writing the newsletters that I have written for 8 years, that would be cool. I have written regular newsletters for literally 8 years, and I put a lot into them. I actually they're not just like salesy. Like, this is the program that I have, on sale right now, or I hit you up every 3 months for, I've got something to sell you. I really put a lot into them.
Yeah, they're little pieces of creative writing. And how long do you spend writing your newsletter each week?
A lot of time. So I think this is important to say. I would say I spend the minimum amount that I would spend on writing a newsletter is 3 hours. Because you're thinking about every piece, the subject line, the subhead, the images, I put links down at the bottom of things that I am selling, if there are any, or events or whatever. Yeah. So it's minimum of 3 hours. And I've definitely spent upwards of 12 doing a piece. So, and I have been doing 2 pieces a week this year. So it's a lot of time.
Yeah.
I also really like it. I was a podcaster. I have been 3 times a podcaster, and podcasting is a job. It is a job. And I would, for me, rather put my creative hours into a writing format than a podcasting format. But I would say I spend about the equal amount of time on each of those mediums, because then you publish the piece, but you also have to let people know it's out there. So I'm publishing, posts on Instagram and linking to it and blah, blah, blah. So Substack is out there. I want to say too, the Luckiest Club is a growing company. We have 4 full-time employees and 12 contractors. Wow. I hired a CEO, so I'm not the CEO. I'm just the founder now, but I'm still very involved. But that's also a very low paying job for me. So what I started to notice is there was a lot of projects that were very fulfilling for me and very time consuming. And so I needed to find ways to create income I couldn't have like more than one, semi full-time job that wasn't paying.
Right. Right.
Even if it was Substack Substack made a lot of sense. And I also just really love the format. I like reading other people's Substacks. I just really like it. I've only been doing it since October of last year. So like less than 6 months. I'm really liking it so far. And one thing, you might be interested in this, I don't know. But at first I was like, everything will be free. If you want to give me money, you can give me money. And around January, I was like, what am I doing? I'm spending a lot of time doing this. And I just said, look, the first newsletter of 2023, I was like, this is how it's going to be here. Some of this is going to be free always, but a good amount of it's not anymore. And if you need a scholarship, email me, I'll give you one. But otherwise we're charging.
Yeah.
And I had like 1 or 2 emails that gave me pushback, but for the most part, I got tons of paid subscriptions after that because people actually do want to support people whose work they value. They do.
Right. Right. And ultimately what this also is saying to me is that you have come to a place where you're prepared to put a monetary value yourself on the work that you're doing, even though you enjoy it. And this is, again, so much about why I started this podcast and what I'm fascinated by, why it's called The Selfish Gift, is because, this is when we're doing the work of our lives, it is meant to be rewarding. And that can look a bunch of different ways. It's meant to be, it will be intrinsically rewarding. That's by definition what makes it the work of our lives. But it is also meant to be monetarily rewarding, emotionally rewarding in terms of, opportunities and things that it opens us up to. And I think that when we're working at cross purposes with ourselves, we're like, I'm just going to do this for the satisfaction, but I'm going to squelch every possible channel of remuneration that might come my way. It's like that. It's going to hold you back.
It does hold you back. And, I think I'm sure you've experienced this. I know I did. Everything I did, I started doing this work when I was still working a full-time job in marketing. I did it for 3 years before I finally quit my job and then was able to quit my job. And I've had many privileges along the way. I've had a lot of help along the way. There's a mixture of like, I have done a lot of time and given away almost everything for free for years. And then you kind of just get into that mode and you don't even realize that you're doing it. And then all of a sudden you look around, you're like, I'm fucking burnt out. I'm exhausted. I love this, but like, I can't pay my bills.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
you became, you became willing to be paid for it.
Yeah. And then I got excited about being paid for it. I mean, and never to the point of gouging people. But if you think about a book, for example, a book is still one of the most astounding pieces of value that you could ever buy. It takes 4, 5, 10 years to write a book. And you pay
and even 20 hours to read it.
Yeah. And you pay at most, the most expensive book you could buy is probably $30.
Right. Right.
It's insane. And it could change your whole life. So, when people say, I remember when the paperback came out, I said, consider buying a paperback. We Are the Luckiest. A lot of people said, why are you pushing your book sales so hard? And I already bought the hardcover. I don't need to buy it again. It was like, okay, I'm not like, you don't have to buy it again, but let's just like look at, that was another reason I wrote how much I made on my first book post, because I wanted to like communicate to people who buy books, A, what authors actually make, and B, how much value is in a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's something I love to talk about too. And I'm so glad you are doing this. It's such it's hard. It's hard to balance these things. And like everybody thinks about it just slightly differently.
Yes. And just as with our, secrecy around alcohol use or other aspects of our lives, when we have secrecy around our success, it's very difficult to uplift and inspire others. And that's what we're here for, right? So
Yeah.
Laura, before we go, I would love for you to just share, if you had a piece of advice to offer someone who's out there looking at where you are now and thinking like, I would love that life for myself. I've got a story to tell. I'm scared. I'm inspired. What would you say to that person?
Yes. I would say start now writing. Because what I always imagine and what I hear a lot is I have a book in me, I have a story to tell, but are you writing anywhere? Have you started to write, even if it's for your own, in your own Google Doc, and document some of these things and get them down? Start a Substack, start a blog, start a newsletter, and start to feel what it's like to actually put those words down and share them with people. Because what I have found is sometimes the idea of doing something is very different than the experience of actually doing it. And the fantasy of doing something is very different than the experience of actually doing it. And so start to actually do it and see what that gives you or what it doesn't.
Right.
Maybe you'll know the further along you go. If you want to keep going, you won't be able to not do it if you really want to do it, is my experience. And what I've heard a lot of people say,
right.
Meaning you won't be able to not write if you really need and want to write, right? Publishing is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And a whole other conversation, but start to do the writing. There are also, I think a lot of times when people think I have a story to write, they automatically think what will happen when the book is out there.
Right.
And there are 200 steps at least in between that and having a book on the shelf, and as many opportunities to adjust and edit and refine what you're saying. Yeah. So write as if no one's ever going to read it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Right. Thank you, Laura. You've been so generous. I feel like I could have 10 more conversations with you about any aspect that we touched upon.
Yeah.
Well, I just wish you so much success with the second book and the third book and on and on and on after that. And thank you for coming on the podcast to share your author journey with me, but also thank you for sharing your sobriety journey in your book. It was meaningful to me, and I know it was meaningful to at least 999,000 other people. So appreciate you so very much.
Oh, you too. Thanks.
I really hope this conversation has inspired you to give so much of your gift to the world that it expands you into your greatest possible version of yourself. Remember, it's not selfish just because we also benefit from it. And here's where I get to make a selfish request. New podcasts need all the help they can get. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and subscribe to us on your favorite platform. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Selfish Gift Podcast. And send me a DM. I'd love to hear how you're sharing your gift with the world.